Welcome to today's episode. My name is Robert. Today we have another reminder note episode here on the podcast. And today's reminder note, I love this one. Really love it. Other people perceive you differently than you perceive yourself. And perception, first of all, is definitely a topic where I have to be honest, never thought that much about. But actually, it is like such an important point of view to look at especially when you think about human beings, right? So imagine you meet someone, I don't know, like meeting a friend, meeting a colleague, a family member, your partner, someone you're dating, someone you're seeing, whatever, whoever. What actually comes to my mind when I think about two people interacting with each other is their perception. Because the way I see or the way I perceive reality is way different from how you perceive reality. So it comes down to the perception when we communicate about anything. And the similar the perception of someone is to the perception of another person, the easier the communication might be. So that's really interesting to think about, to be honest. But the thing is also, and that's the reminder note from today's episode, when I see myself or I perceive myself operating in this world we call reality, I might have a different perception of me operating than you might have seeing me operating. That's definitely an interesting observation. And it's also a really essential observation when you think about how human beings interact with each other. So, especially when it comes to your self-worth, when it comes to topics that are associated to beliefs like I'm not good enough, I could have done better, I wish I would be perfect. So in contexts where your self-worth might be triggered, where you feel insecure, where you want to present yourself from your best side, from your glorious candy side, in those scenarios, it's so helpful to remind yourself that your perception of yourself might be really different than the perception of someone else, how someone else perceives you operating in that reality. So I want to share two stories with you today, which are such amazing examples of how different the perception of yourself can be from the perception of other people seeing you operating. First story is about dating, and that's about both stories are obviously from myself. So these are things I experienced couple months or years ago. So the first story is about dating, and it's a situation like 1 or 2 years ago. So I matched someone on an online dating app, right? And we were texting, and I was like trying to present myself from my best side. So I was trying to be really empathetic and really showing my values in the messengers and like really making a good first impression, like people tend to do when they're flirting and dating. And at some point, I just got a message from her I wanted to reply to. And I just had a super busy day, and then I was like, I missed my train, and I was already stressed, and I was walking home, and I was in a really, really bad mood. And I decided, okay, I'm walking now. I potentially have time to reply to that message on that dating app to that person. So that might be a good moment, but not realizing how stressed I am and how how negative I was perceiving myself in that moment, in that situation. So, and at some point, I decided to send her the first voice message. So she never heard my voice before. She doesn't know how I talk because it's an online dating app, so you only see the pictures and the texting stuff. And I just chose that moment when I walked across that bridge to record that first voice message. And there were train noises in the background. There are people screaming. It was super windy. And then I recorded this audio message. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, my voice sounds so bad today. It sounds so feminine. It sounds so insecure. It does not sound like how a proper man would sound like in a voice message. But I sent it anyway, and then I just had a really bad feeling. I just felt like, oh my gosh, that was like the worst first impression you could ever do. Like, gosh, I felt like so bad, and I just felt like ashamed for sending that voice message on that bridge in that scenario, because I was perceiving myself operating from a really stressed and weak position that day, sending that voice message. So I waited for hours, a couple hours, because she was busy. I don't know what she did, but at some point I just got a message from her, and she just sent me, "You have such a beautiful voice. I really liked your audio message." And I was like, what the hell? Like, how is that even possible? Like, how could I perceive myself such weak and such an unattractive way, but the other person was seeing the opposite, perceiving the complete opposite of how I felt in that situation. So that's a glorious example how different these two perceptions can be when you have two different people. So a third person might say, well, that was just a voice message. Your voice is fine. It's not beautiful. It's not ugly to listen to, but it's just neutral. And then you have different perceptions of that angle. So really interesting. Another story I have for you as well, from a professional context. So I was in a sales call once, because you might know I'm self-employed. I'm running an SEO agency, working with companies, helping them to rank high on Google. So I just had a sales call for an offer. And I just talked with that product manager, the product and marketing manager I talked to a couple days ago. And he was saying oh yeah, your offer is fine. Just a couple details to talk through with the manager, right? So just another final sales call for some more final questions. And I was like, that's easy. I just walk through that. They signed a contract, they become a client. And I was in that sales call, and I didn't even prepare it, because I was thinking, oh yeah, just a couple details. I mean, tiny questions, that's easy to handle. And in that sales call, I was sitting there, and I just sensed that something was off. They were super cold in that call, giving me that feeling of insecurity. And I just felt like that I was like running in the blackout here, in the blackout situation. So they were like asking questions I couldn't even answer. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, like they will never sign that contract because they seemed so distant. They seemed so uninterested. And I felt like more and more insecure and not even able to answer questions like, what other clients do you have, Robin? I was like, I don't know which other clients I do have, because I was like a bit panicky. I was a bit paralyzed in that situation because I felt like so insecure and I felt like so ashamed. And after that call, I just closed my laptop and I just felt pure shame in that situation. I just perceived myself operating from such a weak perspective and thinking that I definitely failed that call as a human being, that I'm not good enough for that contract, for that client. I wasn't even able to send an email because I was scared that they say just like, what was wrong with you? Like, you're not good enough for our company. So I was quiet. And 3 weeks later, I just got a reply on that contract, on that offer. So, and the product manager emailed me, sorry, Robert, that it took so long. I wish we could have signed it earlier. Here's the signed contract. We definitely work with you. That was great. And I was, again, like, how is that even possible to perceive myself operating in such a different way than they saw me or they perceived me operating? I don't know, maybe they sensed the shame, maybe they sensed the insecurity, maybe they did value it and compared my offer with other offers. Maybe I was cheaper, maybe it was still better than the other offers. I don't know, like they didn't tell me. But in the end, it wasn't that bad and they still valued it. And we just had a really good cooperation in the end, which brought great results to them even. So it came out as a scenario which completely turned around and gave me that learning that how I perceive myself operating is often not the reality of someone else seeing me operating. How I see myself does not really mean that other people see myself in that position as well, because they can perceive myself way differently. And often, other people see yourself from a way more positive perspective than you would even think about. Imagine that. Like, most people see yourself from a more positive angle and a less critic angle than you would ever perceive yourself. And that's really interesting to remind yourself on again and again, because things were never that bad as you might perceive them, especially when you are identifying in that situation with strong emotions like shame, insecurities, with fear, which completely fill your body up, especially when you're a highly sensitive person or a person of the sensitive kind. So definitely, if you have similar stories, curious to hear about them, feel free to share them under the episode. And definitely make sure to subscribe to the podcast as well on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever you listen. And I see and speak to you in the next episode. Have a great day.